Something about the sound didn't feel right. Too heavy, too wet. When I stepped onto my father's porch, the boards were slick with blood. He was lying there, music, barely breathing, his face swollen, his hands trembling like he had tried, music, to crawl back inside. And in the dirt beside him, pressed deep into the mud, was a single black glove. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your city or country. That night, the world stopped moving. The porch light kept flickering the way small things do when everything big has already fallen apart. My father was 60, proud, respected, the kind of man you think will always outlive failure. But his body told another story. Broken ribs, bruised ribs, a gash behind his ear from being struck with something hard, deliberate. The sheriff showed up 20 minutes later. A step too slow, a tone too casual, said it looked like a robbery gone wrong. But the cash box from his small engine shop was untouched. His wallet was still in his pocket. They didn't come for money. They came for him. When the ambulance carried him away, I followed quietly. The paramedic said words like head trauma and internal bleeding. Every phrase stabbed harder. My father, once a man who never bent for anyone, now lay silent under a white sheet of oxygen fog. In the emergency room, while nurses hooked him to machines, the sheriff walked in again, said they'd do their best, but rural counties like ours had limited resources. He took a few pictures of the glove, but didn't notice the symbol stitched inside. For numbers, 5,231. I recognized it, not the meaning, but the precision. Whoever wore that glove wasn't a common thief. I hadn't told anyone yet who I was or what I'd done in the past 10 years. People still thought I was just the son who left, the one who never looked back. But behind that silence stood 8 years of covert missions. Delta Force teaches you to stay quiet, observe, strike last. Tonight, that skill became my curse and my weapon. The doctor finally walked in after midnight. He's stable for now, but the damage is serious. Then he whispered like he didn't want to say it out loud. Most of these injuries look professional. Professional. That word meant everything. It meant premeditated. It meant someone planned this. I drove back home in a storm that wouldn't end. Windshield wipers slicing across lightning flashes like gunfire. The porch still smelled of metal and oil. The tools overturned, the wooden steps cracked under blood. I stood there too long, listening to the soft whine of the wind through the trees. Something about the way the door had been broken felt deliberate. It hadn't been forced open all at once, but pried gradually, almost surgical. Whoever came here knew my father, knew where to hit, where to hurt. Inside, the kitchen light was still on. My father always cooked at night when he couldn't sleep. His last meal was still warm when I picked the plate up. Beans, cornbread, and a half-finished beer. And then I saw it on the counter under his reading glasses. 2 things out of place. A manila envelope wrapped with twine and a Polaroid. The photo showed my father standing with 3 men from the county, smiling beside a construction site. But behind them, faint but visible, stood a 4th man in the distance wearing a black jacket with that same number stitched on the arm. 5,231. I took the envelope outside under the porch light. Inside were old court documents dated nearly 20 years ago, lawsuits, property disputes, and one signed affidavit bearing my father's name. Something about stolen funds, missing accounts, a contractor named Preston. The name ticked at my memory. Judge Preston. He used to visit our house when I was a kid. So did his son. The night tightened around me. Every tree in the yard looked like it was hiding someone. My instinct said to check the perimeter. Not fear, habit. I made a slow lap around the property, scanning the soil for tracks, for distinct pairs of boot marks, each uniform, each starting from the road and stopping exactly where the blood began. That precision wasn't random. They wanted to send a message to show power, to humiliate him. When I returned to the porch steps, I sat down, rain dripping from my jacket, my hands covered in dried blood. Underneath that same step where we used to hide spare keys, something glinted. I pulled it out. A brass shell casing unspent .45 caliber. Civilian issue, but the pattern of wear looked used. Militaryra Polish, not casual. Someone had been trained. As thunder cracked overhead, something inside me snapped open. Not rage, not fear, purpose. The kind that lives deep below the bones. I didn't need the sheriff or the system or anyone else bungling routine procedures. I needed truth. But truth never sits on the surface. It hides where pain furs behind silence under smiles inside the people you used to trust. I wiped my hand across my father's blood, pressing my palm to the porch like swearing an oath no one could hear. They thought they heard a man with no protection. They thought this was just an old man's beating. They forgot about the son he raised. I waited till dawn broke, until the rain stopped, until the road turned a dull gray mist. Then I covered the blood with sand and whispered something I hadn't said in years. This wasn't about money. This was personal. I looked down once more at the black glove. The knuckles were armored, the pattern tactical. 4 ridges, one for each intruder. They moved like a team. One for distraction, one for control, one to strike, last to watch. Perfect formation. That's how special units work. They were trained, but not Delta. That I could tell from their precision. It wasn't perfect enough. They wanted to break him, not kill. Something went wrong. Maybe my father said something. Maybe he stood up to them. Maybe he still had that stubborn fire in him, the one that used to scare me when I was young. The sirens were gone now. Neighbors had gone back inside. The birds started again like life hadn't changed. But everything had. I pulled out my old service ID, the one with corners bent and colors faded. I hadn't touched it in years. I pressed it flat against the black glove. Whoever did this thought they buried their past under masks. They were wrong. They didn't know what kind of man they left standing. By morning, the storm had settled, but the silence that followed felt heavier than thunder. The house smelled like salt, metal, and betrayal. Every corner looked haunted by what had happened just hours ago. I barely slept, just sat by the window waiting for the hospital to call. When the phone finally rang, I thought I was ready to hear anything. But the nurse's voice shook when she said, "He's stable, but still no memory of what happened." That line lingered. No memory. Maybe that was mercy. Or maybe someone made sure he wouldn't remember. I packed a duffel, drove back to the cabin, and walked through the doorless frame again. The day's first light made the place look almost peaceful, but the bloodstains still told the truth. I started cleaning, not because I needed to, but because I needed to think. While wiping the counter, a hollow sound echoed from under the sink. A loose panel. My father wasn't the type to hide anything. At least the man I grew up with wasn't. Pulling the panel out revealed a narrow compartment lined with dust. Inside was a faded blue folder tied with cracked string. I opened it carefully. Inside were property documents, old letters, a court seal, and one photo tucked near the bottom. In that photograph, my father looked 20 years younger, standing beside 3 people: Judge Preston, his wife, and a woman whose smile I recognized instantly. Harper. She was my mother's best friend once. The woman who used to watch me when Mom got sick. Her name was written on the back in my father's handwriting. Below it, a single word: debt. I couldn't tell if it meant money or something older, darker. By noon, I drove to town to find Harper. She still worked at the courthouse just 2 blocks from where we used to get ice cream after school. The building hadn't changed. The same cracked steps, the same clock that always ran 5 minutes slow. That's where I saw her through the glass door. Same sharp eyes, same careful way she fixed her hair before facing anyone that mattered. She looked up, froze, then smiled too fast. Logan, the kind of smile that hides 100 small lies. Inside her office, the smell of lemon polish and old paper filled the air. She started talking before I could ask a single thing. About how sorry she was, how awful it was to hear about my father, how people these days are capable of terrible things. Her words came too polished, too prepared. Then she glanced at the file in my hand, the one I'd found under the sink. Her voice cracked just for a second. And if you've ever interrogated suspects, you know the sound when truth bleeds through polished lies. Something terrified her. I leaned forward a little, not speaking, just letting silence do its job. Finally, she muttered, "You shouldn't dig through your father's past. It's not safe." She picked up her pen and twisted it hard like the motion alone might stop her from saying more. That's when she said a name: Mason. She didn't say who he was yet, but the way her eyes drifted toward a picture frame told me enough. A young man with her nose, her hair, her pride, her son, the kid who grew up across the street. I left without another word. Outside, the sunlight looked sharper, colder. Back in my truck, I sat still for a long time, replaying her tone, her tremble. Mason, her son, one of the 4 it had to be. Driving back toward the hospital, I stopped at a red light near the old courthouse cafe. On the windshield, someone had stuck a plain white envelope. No stamp, no address, just pressed under the wiper like it was waiting for me. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was printed, block letters, clean, deliberate. "Your father deserved what he got. Stay out of this, soldier." They knew who I was. That changed everything. I checked my mirrors, scanning corners the way I used to overseas. Same feeling, eyes where you can't see them. I slid the note into my jacket and drove straight to the hospital. My hand stayed steady, but something inside me wanted to shake the world apart. My father's room was quiet, except for the monitor beeping steady and slow. His face looked calmer now, but I could see the damage in every bruise, every breath that came too carefully. There were deep scratches on his right hand, fresh. He fought them off longer than anyone could have expected. I sat down beside him, staring at that hand. Then I noticed his wedding ring wasn't there. That was impossible. He never took it off, not even after Mom died. The skin where it used to be was marked, swollen. Someone had pulled it off. Why? I stood up, walked to the window, and stared at the parking lot below. A black sedan sat parked too long in the shade of a maple tree. Its engine idled without exhaust showing means it had just started. Instinct told me to get a plate number. I stepped into the hallway, moved fast but quiet. By the time I reached the side door, the car was gone. Only tire tracks remained on the wet concrete. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I kept hearing Harper's voice. "It's not safe to dig through your father's past." The next morning, I went back to the cabin, determined to find whatever she feared I'd uncover. The blue folder wasn't the only thing hidden. My father always believed in building things that lasted. His workbench had a false drawer, one I helped him build when I was a kid. We joked it was our secret hiding spot for candy. I pried it open with a screwdriver. Inside was a small black ledger, the kind that fits in a coat pocket. Every page was filled with numbers, dates, and single initials. Cash movements, property expenses, legal fees. At the last page, the writing stopped abruptly. Just one unfinished line. "Tell Logan." Then a long scratch that slashed halfway through the paper. Beside it lay a metal pen, not ordinary, engraved with a brass insignia reading County Infrastructure Program. That was Judge Preston's old initiative. Everything, it seemed, started with him. I closed the ledger, tucked it in my jacket, and looked around the cabin one last time. The walls that once kept us safe now felt like they were listening. There was no home left here, only unspoken truth. Before leaving, I turned back toward the porch. Still scarred, still stained, still silent. I whispered under my breath, "Whatever you started, Dad, I'll finish it right." Then I walked away from that old house, not knowing that the next time I came back, there'd be another body on that same porch. That evening, the hospital called again. My father had woken up, but only long enough to whisper a few disconnected words before slipping back under sedation. The nurse said he kept repeating the same thing. "Don't trust the familiar." They knew the code. That sentence kept replaying in my head as I drove downtown. They knew the code. It had to mean something specific to the cabin. Maybe the lock combination or the safe we kept under the shed. Only a handful of people ever knew it. Family, one old neighbor, and my childhood best friend, Kyle. We hadn't spoken in years. He still lived in town. Ran a small auto shop near the river. Used to help Dad with engine parts back when the world still made sense. When I stepped into his shop, the sound of humming tools filled the room. Grease, burnt oil, country music playing too low in the corner. Same place, same smell, but something new in the air. Guilt has a sound if you listen hard enough. Kyle turned his face pale when he saw me. "Logman heard about your dad. Hell of a thing." His smile was quick, shaky, his eyes jumpy. I didn't return it. My gaze flicked around the shop. Every workbench clean except one back corner. 4 sets of boots hung to dry by a heater. Matching patterns. Same tread I'd seen outside the cabin. My pulse stayed steady. Training has a way of burying impulse deep beneath calm. "You got a lot of new hands working here," I said. He wiped his hands with a rag, forcing a laugh. "Yeah, just some part-time guys. Don't even show half the time." Half truth. His voice gave it away. The stall before the end of a sentence. That small split second where your brain hesitates because it's trying to remember the lie you told last time. I stepped closer to one of the boots. The mud dried into gray clumps around the sole's edge. Same type of dirt from Dad's porch. Dark clay mixed with sand. Not something you'd find near town. Kyle noticed me looking. "They were cleaning out the quarry earlier this week." "Big job, quarry." The word lodged in me like a blade. I hadn't said a thing about where the attack happened or what direction the tracks led. Only someone who'd been there would think to mention it. He kept talking too fast, pulling jokes out of nowhere, acting as if saying more would earn him forgiveness in advance. I nodded slowly, then said I dropped by later to have him check the truck's brakes, an old gesture of false trust. When I left, I stayed in shadow across the street, parked low near a rundown grocery sign. At closing time, around 9, the lights in Kyle's shop dimmed. Minutes later, he stepped out, locked up, and climbed into his pickup. He wasn't alone. Another man sat in the passenger seat. Tall, lean, black jacket with a distinct ridge stitched across the shoulder seam. That same signature I'd seen on the glove. I followed them at a distance. Lights off. Engine low. Training kicked in automatically. Maintain distance. Use ambient light. Keep parallel movement. They drove across town past empty intersections until the pavement turned to gravel. Eventually, they stopped at a warehouse near the edge of the industrial park. Old site, abandoned for years since the county declared it structurally unsafe. Both got out, glancing around before disappearing inside. I parked 2 blocks away and walked in the dark, counting steps, scanning corners. The air smelled of rust and river water. Through a cracked window, I saw a flickering light. Someone inside had rigged up a portable lamp for shadows moved in a half circle. Kyle, the man from the truck, and 2 others. No masks this time, but enough familiarity to confirm everything. One of them had a slight limp. Exactly the gait I'd seen on those porch tracks near the front steps. They were arguing. I caught words between echoes. He wasn't supposed to hit him that hard. Orders were to warn, not to. She said he'd confess if scared enough. She's a pronoun that changed everything. One of them slammed a fist onto a table, cursing about evidence, about guilt. Then another voice, low and sharp. Harper said, "Cleanup's done. Judge's son wants no trace left at the cabin." Harper. Judge's son. Mason. It all spun into place. Not a random attack, not even vengeance. Something bigger layered. I pressed closer to the wall, breath held. The shadows shifted. One man stood heading for the back exit, the same one near me. I slipped behind an old steel column as boots brushed past. He muttered to himself, dialing on his phone. The name that flashed briefly in the reflection of a broken window made my stomach tighten. Preston. No first name, just Preston. I waited until the door slammed, then moved back toward the corner of the warehouse, holding my breath against the smell of fuel. On an old metal table sat an envelope marked with grease prints, papers spilled from it, billing receipts, a map, photos. I only had 5 seconds before headlights swept the back wall, forcing me to duck out, but I saw enough. One picture frozen in time. My father standing outside his cabin, taken weeks before the attack. From the angle, it was surveillance. Someone had been watching him long before the night they struck. News broke the next day that one of Judge Preston's former construction accounts was under audit for missing state funds. My father had been audit inspector back then. He must have found something worth silencing. When I looked at that photograph later, the reflection in the window behind my father showed another face, half hidden, but unmistakably familiar. Harper's. The realization hit harder than any bullet. They weren't just cleaning up old corruption. They were erasing witnesses. That night, I sat by my father's hospital bed again. His eyes fluttered open just once, words barely more than breath. "Harper's boy, Mason, tell no one." Then the monitor beeped faster, nurses rushing in. I stepped back, heart hammering as doctors swarmed him. In that chaos, one thought burned brighter than anything. If Harper was involved, then Kyle wasn't the only one wearing a mask. The whole town was. And somewhere inside that web of secrets, the people who hurt my father were still breathing, still smiling, still pretending. But not for long. The following morning, fog hung low over the town like smoke that refused to clear. Every streetlight looked dimmer, every face harder to trust. I drove to the courthouse again, straight toward the woman who once tucked me in when my mother was too sick to stand. Harper. She was already there when I arrived, standing outside on the courthouse steps, talking to someone I couldn't see from the truck window. Her posture gave her away. Sharp shoulders, movement too careful. That wasn't grief, that was control. The kind of control that comes from knowing you started something you can't undo. I waited until the other person left before walking up. Her smile was brittle when she saw me. "Logan, how's your father holding up? I've been praying for him." Her words missed timing with her eyes. She looked everywhere but at me. "I need to ask about something," I said flatly. "Mason and Judge Preston." Her face stiffened. "You shouldn't drag them into this. I think they're already in it." That stopped her. Her hand froze halfway through brushing her hair. A second later, she gave a small, almost soundless laugh. "You always did have your father's imagination." I let the silence stretch until the cracks showed. Lies collapsed under quiet faster than noise. Her voice faltered again, eyes darting toward the courthouse door where employees started to trickle in. "Not here," she muttered. Too many eyes. She walked toward the parking lot. I followed. The air felt thick, like the air before a storm. The kind that reminds you something's about to break. We stopped near her car, a silver sedan polished to a lawyer's perfection. She opened the door, but instead of getting in, she pulled an old photograph from her purse and held it out. "I keep this," she said softly, "to remind myself he was once a good man." It was my father in his 20s smiling beside two women. One of them my mother, the other Harper. Younger, freer, almost unrecognizable in how happy she looked. "What happened to him?" I asked. Her lips trembled. "He chose your mother." The words hit like static, thick and sharp. She looked down, ashamed, but there was no regret in her tone. Only bitterness aged like rust. "After she passed, I kept visiting him. We talked about everything. Politics, the land, money, old cases. When he found out how much Preston was taking from county funds, he said he'd expose it. He didn't listen when I told him not to." Her voice broke completely now, and tears slid down her face, smearing her mascara in crooked trails. "You think I wanted this?" He wouldn't stop digging. My breath stayed steady, but heavy. "You mean they wouldn't let him?" Her silence said yes. She looked at me then, eyes red, whispering like she didn't want her own words to exist. "They promised it would just scare him. Mason swore no one would get hurt." My jaw clenched. "Your son hit my father with a crowbar." She staggered back, one hand to her chest. "He told me it got out of hand, that one of the others panicked." I tried to fix this. I begged Judge Preston to leave it alone. Then it became she couldn't finish. The shards of truth started fitting together in my mind. Harper's guilt, Mason's involvement, Preston pulling the strings. My father's silence all these years wasn't about corruption. It was about protecting someone who didn't deserve it. Harper wiped her tears, shoulders shaking. You don't understand. You go digging into this. They'll come for you too. These people don't forgive and they don't forget. I took a step closer, my voice barely above a whisper. Then they'll learn what happens when they make that mistake. She looked up, terrified. Maybe because she realized the quiet way I said it wasn't anger. It was final. Before leaving, I asked one last thing. Who hired the other men? She hesitated. Preston handled that. But Logan. Her expression collapsed into despair. Your father had something hidden. Something he called insurance. If they haven't found it yet, they will. Where? She looked toward the courthouse clock. Old storage unit near the river. The one by the sawmill road. He used to keep everything there. I turned to leave. She called out, almost pleading, don't do anything you can't come back from. I didn't answer. She, of all people, should have known I'd already gone past that point the night. I saw my father bleeding on the porch. The drive to the river felt endless. The sun was barely up, dripping through the mist like crushed gold. I stopped at the storage lot. Row after row of rusted doors lined up like headstones. My father's unit, number 19, sat near the back. The lock was old, but new scratch marks surrounded it. Someone had tried to open it recently, then stopped. I drew a deep breath and lifted the door. The hinges screamed. Inside, dust floated like ash in the air. There wasn't much. A few boxes, an old workbench, shelves with labeled binders. But there, taped under the bench, was a small drive wrapped in black tape written across in faded pen. Preston full record. My heartbeat steadied into focus. When I pocketed it, headlights flared across the far end of the lot. A dark SUV pulled in, engine growling low. My instincts fired. I ducked between the storage rows, crouching low until the sound stopped. Footsteps crunched gravel. A man's voice muttered something muffled by distance. Then a metallic click echoed. A gun being racked. I held still, every sense sharpened. The door of my father's unit slammed open. The man cursed under his breath. He rummaged through boxes, tossing them against walls. Then another voice said, "Nothing here." He's already been a pause. Then Preston won't like that. Their footsteps faded, retreating toward the SUV. Tires scattered gravel as they sped off, leaving emptiness and exhaust hanging behind. When the sound disappeared down the road, I finally stood up, brushing dirt off my hands. I looked at the drive again at the shaky handwriting of a man who tried to protect what mattered. Maybe it wasn't just proof of corruption. Maybe it was the reason they came that night. In that moment, I realized something Harper never said aloud. She hadn't warned me out of guilt. She warned me because she knew Preston would erase every trace, and everyone connected. I climbed into the truck, turned the ignition, and checked the rear view one more time. The fog had swallowed the road behind me like the world didn't want me to turn back, even if I tried. Back at the hospital, I sat beside my father again, watching the way his chest rose, fragile but alive. I rested the drive on the nightstand beside him, whispering quietly, "You kept the truth. I'll use it." Machines hummed softly. Outside, thunder rolled again in the distance. Then a shadow crossed the hallway window. Someone standing there watching. A black jacket, motionless. By the time I stepped into the hall, it was gone. But the faint smell of oil and sweat still lingered in the air. By the following day, the wind had turned colder, carrying that sharp winter bite that seeps through the walls no matter how tightly you close them. It was the kind of cold that makes silence feel heavier. My father was still alive, but his body fought for every breath. His lips moved sometimes, half-formed words that I couldn't piece together. And all I could think was how close I'd come to losing him before hearing the truth. That flash drive I found in the storage unit sat on the nightstand beside his bed like the world's smallest bomb. Quiet, ordinary, loaded with consequences. I plugged it into my old laptop later that morning. A folder popped up labeled simply for Logan. Inside were scanned court documents, bank transfers, property records, all tying Judge Preston to millions siphoned out of infrastructure budgets over the past 2 decades. There were signed authorizations, offshore accounts, and his legal partner's notarized copy of an old will. The name written at the top of that will stop my breathing. Harper Preston. But that wasn't the shock. My father's name appeared too. Michael Ryder listed as a secondary signatory, the date matching the year my mother died. Just below that, beneficiaries Mason Preston, jointly entitled as successor to trust holdings upon Michael Ryder's incapacitation or death. The air in the room felt dense, pressing against my ribs. My father wasn't a victim of random violence. He stood in the way of a generational handover of corruption, a contract masked as inheritance. Someone knocked gently at the hospital door. It was Emily, his nurse. He's awake for a few minutes each hour. Just don't push him too hard. I nodded, closing the laptop. When she left, I took his hand lightly. Dad, you kept all this buried. Why didn't you ever tell me? His eyes opened halfway, gray and clouded, but aware. Because I thought I could fix it before it reached you. His voice sounded like gravel sliding down metal. He swallowed hard. Preston's hands are everywhere. Courts, police, even Harper's firm. Nothing touches him. He closed his eyes again, forcing a shallow breath. The will. They wanted the land, the storage leases, the accounts. I refused. They took your mother first. I knew they'd come back someday. Words clawed their way up my throat. But before I could answer, the heart monitor chirped faster. Nurses rushed in and they guided me out. I watched through the small glass window as they stabilized him again. When they were done, I slipped out quietly and went straight to the county records office. If there was a forged document, there'd be traces of who filed it. The clerk, an old friend of my father's, recognized my name and let me back into the archives. I searched through registry logs until I found it. Record number 274B. The Preston estate will filed and witnessed by Harper Ellis. Ask Harper's signature sat there clear as daylight. She had notarized her own false inheritance deal. Back outside, a storm was rolling in. Thunderhead stacked behind the courthouse like a threat. I drove toward Harper's house, but stopped when I saw another car already in her driveway. A black luxury sedan with tinted windows. Preston's driver stood out front smoking. I parked 2 blocks away, watched the man toss his cigarette, step inside, and shut the door behind him. The house lights flickered as silhouettes moved across the curtains. Tension in my chest coiled tighter with each passing minute. Then I saw something flash through the window. 2 people facing each other. Harper's movements looked panicked. Preston's were controlled, deliberate. His hands slammed down on the table. She shook her head once, hit her face with trembling fingers, and then everything went still. A second later, the driver came back out alone. I waited for 30 minutes after the car left before walking up to the porch. The door was barely latched. I pushed it open quietly. The house smelled of expensive perfume over something metallic. Harper sat in the living room, eyes glassed, empty, staring through me like she was already somewhere else. She whispered before I could ask anything. I was supposed to destroy the will. Preston said he'd forgive the debt if I did. But Michael, her voice cracked. Your father had me keep a copy hidden in case anything happened to him. Where? She pointed to the fireplace mantel. I reached up and pulled out a sealed envelope buried behind a decorative clock. Inside, my father's handwriting, firm, steady, outlined everything he knew about Preston's bribes and how Harper got trapped into signing his deals years ago. He also wrote one last instruction. If you're reading this, it means the truth is past saving in silence. Let the courts see what we couldn't. I folded it carefully and slipped it inside my jacket. You could have stopped this, Harper. Her chin trembled. I thought I could protect Mason, she said, voice barely audible. He's just a kid, not like them. I didn't tell her I'd already seen the footage that placed Mason at the warehouse. Some truths destroy people faster than lies. And right then, she already looked like her soul was cracking under its own weight. Thunder rumbled closer. I stepped out without looking back. Halfway to the truck, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. The voice on the line was deep, calm, deliberate. You're digging where you don't belong, Ryder. Who is this? You can call me a friend. If you want your father to stay alive, hand over what he took from Preston. Silence stretched. You've got until tomorrow night. No police, no press. You bring the drive to the quarry alone. Then the line went dead. I stared at the black screen, feeling the weight of every word. The quarry. Kyle had mentioned it before. That's where all of them met. That's where they buried secrets. Now they wanted to bury me too. I looked through the windshield. Far ahead, lightning split the horizon open. It glowed silver against the cliffs where my father once taught me to shoot targets and trust no one. Tomorrow that place would become something else where truth and madness came to reckon. And for the first time since coming home, I wasn't sure which side I was standing on anymore. Morning came and went without light. The sky hung heavy and gray like something waiting to fall. I barely slept, too busy running through plans that all ended the same way. One road leading straight to the quarry. By dusk, I was on that road. The flash drive in my coat pocket, my dad's old truck rumbling beneath me. The closer I got, the stronger the air smelled of iron and dust. The quarry had been abandoned for years, a hollow scar in the earth where the county once dug up limestone and secrets. They wanted me here. That much I knew, but they didn't know what I'd become since I left this town. At the entrance gate, 2 sets of tire tracks crossed the mud. I killed the headlights, coasted forward, and parked beside an old crane. Wind howled through broken scaffold beams. Under that sound, voices carried from deep inside the pit. 4 of them. The same cadence I'd heard that night at the warehouse. The same balance of command and fear. I slipped down the incline, using the shadows for cover, boots silent against the loose gravel. The pit's center was lit by a construction lamp hanging off a truck hood. Around it stood Preston, Kyle, another man I didn't recognize, and Mason, every one of them armed. Mason's face was pale, restless. His jaw worked tight like he was trying to chew through guilt. Preston, meanwhile, looked untouched by human thoughts. A judge even off the bench. I crouched behind a rusted bulldozer and listened. Preston's voice cut through the wind. "The boy's late. He'll come. They all come when family's a leash." Kyle shifted uneasily. "Maybe we should." "You talk too much," Preston snapped. "Ryder's predictable. He shows up thinking vengeance makes him righteous, just like his father." That last line twisted something deep inside me. They weren't just killing for money. This was generational punishment masquerading as justice. I reached into my jacket, pulled out a small device, a recording pen. I clicked it on. Stepping into the light now would mean no turning back. I walked forward slowly, boots crunching gravel loud enough to turn every head toward me. Kyle's eyes widened the second he saw me. "Logan, keep talking," I interrupted, voice steady. "I almost believed you weren't part of this." Preston smiled cold and thin. "You're more like your father than you think. Always sticking your nose where the law should be left alone." "You mean your law?" I said. He spread his hands. "The same law that let him breathe this long. Mercy is an expensive currency, son." Mason looked up then, his voice shaking. He didn't know. "Judge, he came for his dad." "Stop this." Preston's gaze hardened. "Loyalty is a virtue, boy, until it turns into rot. You remember who paid your mother's debts?" Mason froze, eyes darting between us. He looked 1 second away from breaking. That was when I said it slowly, each word like a stone landing. "You hired 4 men to beat a 60-year-old like a dog. Now I want you to tell me why." The wind died completely. Nobody spoke. Preston's silence said everything. He wasn't used to being challenged without control. Finally, he nodded toward Kyle. "Show him." Kyle stepped forward, pulling something from his coat. A black pouch. He tossed it on the ground. "Gold watch, wallet, wedding ring. My father's considerate evidence," Preston said. "The man stole from his own contracts. Frame my firm." He had it coming. Another lie added to the list. I took a slow breath to keep the calm mask in place, even as my hands curled inward. "You spent years hiding behind titles," I said. "But you forgot one thing about people like me. We don't need a court to see justice served." Preston scoffed. "You think you can scare me? You're one-man writer. A ghost in muddy boots. I own this town." "Maybe so, but ghosts don't play by the same rules as the living." I threw something behind me. A small stone tracker I'd activated before stepping into the quarry. If the journalist who got that earlier package was listening, they'd be hearing this conversation already. Every word recorded. I moved closer. There were 4 that night. I count 3 here. "Where's the 4th? Kyle flinched. Mason spoke up. "He's dead. Shot trying to run after they found out Dad kept proof." Preston didn't even blink. Weak men always fold first. Mason turned to him, disgust radiating like heat. "You destroyed everyone around you for a stack of paper." Preston's calm broke for the first time. His voice raised, eyes sharp. "That paper built everything you live in. Every school, every bank, every wall. You think justice keeps the lights on. Men like me do. The truth of monsters always sounds loudest just before the fall." I stepped forward until the lamp's glare cut half across my face. "You talk like a builder, but you dig graves. Preston, for years ago, you made my father an enemy so you'd never have to look in one." He lifted his gun halfway. "I warned your father. I'm warning you. Walk away." My voice dropped low. "I don't do warnings. I wasn't armed to kill, only to end this." I moved fast. A flash of light, loud crack. He fired too late. I ducked left, grabbed Kyle's arm as he raised his weapon, twisted, slammed him to the ground. The gun skidded away. Mason froze, eyes wide. Preston stepped back, panic slicing through his authority. "You'll spend the rest of your head." Didn't finish because the rumble of engines echoed from above. Sheriff trucks rolling down the dirt path, lights flaring red. I smiled faintly. "Guess the town's listening tonight." Kyle groaned on the ground. Mason dropped his weapon and Preston went silent, calculating escapes that no longer existed. I looked around at the pit, the cracked ground beneath us, the trembling light swinging overhead. "4 men came to my father's house that night," I said quietly. "You all walked as if death was for someone else, but you dug your own graves." Thunder cracked above, rain beginning to fall. The red and blue lights bled across the rock walls, stretching shadows long. I turned my back and started walking toward the slope as officers shouted commands behind me. When I reached the edge, I looked down one last time. Preston stood surrounded, coat soaked, head bowed. Not from guilt, from the realization that power had finally left his hands. That night, as I sat in my truck watching the quarry fill with rainwater, I realized something almost cruel. Revenge doesn't heal. It just settles the score long enough for silence to start again. And even silence carries ghosts. The storm didn't stop that night. It just moved. Rain washed the quarry clean, but the filth that ran this town stayed clothed in expensive suits and handshakes. By the next morning, the story had already changed. Local news called the quarry incident a misunderstanding between contractors. Preston was out within hours. No charges, no trace of the federal recording I'd sent. The sheriff refused to look me in the eye when I asked what happened. I didn't need an answer. I knew Preston hadn't just bought power, he owned it. By sunset, new invitations were making their rounds. County Development Gala hosted by the one man who should have been behind bars. Preston's smooth recovery. Same mask, same arrogance. The idea of walking into his world again didn't feel like choice. It felt like gravity. I had the drive, a duplicate of the evidence, and one last sliver of a plan. He'd use my father's porch like a warning. I'd use his ballroom like a mirror. The hotel was carved from glass and marble, all gleam and emptiness. Cars lined the entrance, tuxedos and silk dresses stepping out like royalty into rotten soil. Soft jazz floated over chatter that read of manipulation. I traded my jacket for a waiter's black vest and blended into the background. The same trick that made me invisible in rooms far louder than this. Through the crowd, I saw him. Judge Preston, taller than memory, voice smooth as oil as he laughed too easily, shaking hands, filling the air with shallow warmth. Beside him stood Harper, pale, eyes hollow. She'd been pulled back into his gravity too. Maybe by guilt, maybe by threat. Mason wasn't there. That worried me. I waited until the speeches started. Preston took the stage under chandeliers, microphone glowing in his hand, smile ready for every camera in town. We live in a world built on integrity, he began, and my fingers clenched around the tray I carried. He talked about structure and growth, about truth as the foundation of community. Every word tasted like poison. Then his gaze swept over the crowd and froze on me, recognition slicing through that mask. He hesitated for the smallest second, almost invisible to everyone else. But to me, it was thunder. His smile stretched tighter. Even those who once opposed progress, he said, learned that forgiveness is a civic virtue. Forgiveness, he said it like he was the one giving it. When the applause started, I stepped between tables. Casual stride, no rush. My footsteps sank into the carpet as the speech wrapped and waiters moved through with dessert trays. He'd started descending the stage when I stopped right in front of him. The air between us thickened instantly. He leaned closer, voice low enough to hide under the music. Still playing? Soldier, are we? His grin stayed steady. You should have taken my deal. I slipped an envelope onto the buffet table beside him. Consider this a trade, I said quietly. Proof of everything you've buried. Photographs, ledgers, witness statements. It's all ready with a journalist. If anything happens to me or my father, it all goes public. He chuckled softly like boredom disguised as courtesy. And here I thought you were smarter than your father. He plucked a champagne glass off a passing tray. You're bluffing. You wouldn't expose Harper. You still think she can be saved. My jaw tightened. You should have stayed in your courtroom where masks belong. Maybe, he said, sipping calmly. But I prefer theaters like this. People obey stories more than truth. He leaned close enough that I caught the faint scent of cologne and smoke. You're in mine now. Not for long. I turned to leave, but before I reached the door, the music stopped. A ripple of murmur spread through the hall. Behind me, someone shouted, "Fire!" No smell of smoke, no heat, just chaos. Heads turned toward the entrance where a staff member pointed at flickering lights. False alarm, deliberate distraction. When I looked back at the stage, Preston was gone. I pushed through the crowd, scanning exits until I caught a glimpse of him heading toward the side corridor. Harper followed, clutching her clutch tight against her chest. I followed, keeping to the edge of light. The hallway stretched behind the banquet hall toward the outdoor terrace overlooking the downtown Riverwalk. Wind rushed through open glass doors, pulling the music into echoes. Preston stood near the railing, calm again, city lights burning behind him. Harper hovered by his side, tears streaking her makeup. "Please," she said, "just let him go." He ignored her. "You knew this day would come, Harper. You delayed it long enough. What do you want?" I asked, stepping forward. He turned, slow smile, twisting back onto his face. "You gone. It's that simple." When I didn't move, he sighed, gesturing toward Harper. "Tell him," she flinched. "Mason's missing," she whispered. "He took your father's file from my home earlier. Preston's men are already looking for him." The world tilted for a moment. Mason had the file, my father's physical proof, the one copy outside of the drive. If they found him first, it had all vanish. Preston's teeth flashed. "You see, you tried to play equal with men who built this place. But justice lives on paper, and paper burns easy." He started to walk past me, brushing my shoulder with the kind of confidence that comes from never being stopped before. "You'll learn," he murmured. "Some of us can't be buried." That was the last thing he said before disappearing back into the golden light of the ballroom. Harper sank against the railing, sobbing. I stood there staring down at the black water below, his reflection distorted by wind and current. Somewhere out there, Mason was running. Maybe from guilt, maybe toward redemption. Either way, the past wasn't done taking from us. I pulled out my phone, opened the GPS feed I'd embedded on the flash drive. One faint signal blinking east of town. The quarry road again. He'd gone back the place where it all began. I turned to Harper. If you ever wanted to make this right, tonight's all you've got. She nodded weakly, clutching her coat. For the first time since any of this began, her guilt outweighed her fear. As I drove away from the hotel, rain started again, streaking across the windshield in crooked veins of silver. Lights blurred. The road narrowed into a tunnel of darkness. In that reflection, for a moment, I saw my father's eyes staring back at me. Steady, patient, waiting. I pressed harder on the gas. Somewhere in that darkness, Mason still had a chance to tell the truth. But the kind of men Preston created didn't let witnesses speak twice, and I wasn't letting another soul die for silence. The roads out of town twisted like scars through the forest, slick with rain and moonlight. My headlights caught fragments of branches, broken trails, tire marks. Every sign that someone had driven this way not long ago. Mason, the boy torn between his mother's guilt and a father's corruption. The closer I got to the quarry, the thicker the fog grew, curling through the trees like smoke off a battlefield. The world narrowed to the wet hum of the engine and the sound of my breath. When I reached the last bend before the cliffs, I saw it, a beat-up white car parked half off the road. Engine still warm. Mason's. He hadn't gone inside the quarry. He'd stopped short. The driver's door hung open, rain pooling in the footwell. A faint sound came from the nearby woods, snapping twigs, soft muff of footsteps. I followed the noise. 50 yards in, I found him. Mason sat on a fallen tree, water dripping from his hair. His hands were shaking, a pistol dangling uselessly between them. When he looked up, his eyes were red and swollen like he'd cried too long, but hadn't finished. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice raw. I could say the same. He laughed once, bitter and exhausted. "You think I care what happens now? He's done with me anyway. Said I failed, said I embarrassed the family. He's wrong." He scoffed and looked away. Nobody's ever wrong when they have enough money and fear on their side. I waited. Silence did more work than anger ever could. Rain pattered gentle circles in the mud between us. Finally, his voice cracked. "I just wanted to scare him," he said, staring down. "Your father? We were supposed to break something else. Property windows, not bones. Harper told me he'd been stealing files from my dad's office. She said it was personal, but I think she just wanted to protect herself." "Who ordered the hit?" "We didn't call it that," he whispered. "Kyle said it'd be quick. The fourth guy, Evan. He panicked when your dad fought back. He hit him harder than planned. After that, it wasn't supposed to happen like that. We left him there." Harper picked me up crying. She thought it was over, but it wasn't over. It never is when guilt's the only currency. Mason reached into his coat and pulled out a damp envelope. The file Harper had mentioned. The papers inside were soaked but readable. "This is what he wanted destroyed," he said, pressing it into my hands. "Everything. Contracts, deals, court authorizations. My father built this whole county on fraud. He used Judge Preston like a puppet. He used all of us." I flipped through the muddy pages. Preston's signature, county seals, land grabs, names of shell companies tied back to Mason's family. My father had saved everything because he knew this day would come. Light flashed suddenly through the trees. Headlights sweeping over trunks. Mason froze. Tires screeched up on the dirt road above. Voices shouted orders. "He found me," Mason said. The sedan from the gallow roared into view. 2 silhouettes inside. Preston's men. I grabbed Mason by the jacket. "Move!" We took off through the brush, mud sucking at our boots, branches clawing our arms as bullets snapped through the trees behind us. Adrenaline blurred everything down to motion and sound. Heartbeats, gunfire, breath, rain. We reached an old culvert that tunneled under the road. Crawling through it, mud coating our hands, we emerged on the other side of the ravine. The shouts grew distant. Mason was gasping for air, his body trembling from more than fear. "They'll kill me," he said quietly. "Not if we get out alive first." "Alive doesn't mean clean," he said, voice quivering. "You don't get redemption when blood's already spilled." Before I could respond, another shot cracked the night. Mason jerked forward, collapsing into me, blood spreading across his shoulder. "Mason." He struggled to speak, voice fading fast. I tried to make it right. Another shot echoed. I dragged him behind a truck wreck lodged by the roadside. From the fog, 2 figures appeared. Preston wasn't among them, just his enforcers. I returned fire. Controlled bursts aimed low. One went down. The other fled back toward the car. The echo rolled like thunder, then settled into silence. I turned back to Mason. He was pale, hands clutching the open wound, red soaked through his shirt. "You need a hospital," I said. He shook his head weakly. "No time. Listen, I put a copy of the file inside Harper's safe courthouse. Code's her birthday. If you want this to mean something, don't give it to the police. Give it to the journalist. My mother trusts her." He coughed once, blood spilling onto his arm. "Tell her," I said. "Tell her I." The rest stuttered out before he could finish. His eyes drifted toward the sky, fog swirling around us like smoke from something holy. For a long time, I didn't move. Rain blurred everything. The trees, the road, the sound of engines fading. There's a moment after someone dies where the world feels too quiet, like time itself bows its head. I hadn't known Mason well enough to mourn him, but I felt something heavier. The weight of a life warped by his father's lies. When I lifted him onto my shoulder, the papers fell from my jacket pocket, scattering across the mud like fallen feathers. I gathered every torn piece, storing them inside my coat again. He died trying to fix what older men had broken. That deserved to mean something. By dawn, I reached Harper's house. Her lights were off, curtains drawn, but I didn't knock. I left the file sealed inside her mailbox, wrapped in a plastic cover for my truck. I knew she'd find it, and I knew the guilt would tear her apart far worse than any confrontation could. Driving away, the storm finally broke open. The rain came in sheets, cleaning the roads, but not me. Mason's voice reverberated through my mind. Alive doesn't mean clean. He was right. Revenge never wipes the slate. It just redraws the scars. In the distance, red lights flickered. Police, maybe paramedics, maybe ghosts. I didn't stop. I just drove until the fog thinned and morning stretched its pale, tired light across the world. The fight wasn't over. Preston was still free. But now, for the first time, he'd lost his son to his own creation. And that kind of loss, no man can buy his way out of. Dawn came pale and colorless, the kind of light that doesn't feel alive yet. The storm had washed the town clean, but left every street smelling of rot. I pulled off the road just outside the quarry, parked beneath a ridge, and stared at the horizon until my breath stopped shaking. Mason was gone. Harper had the file. And Preston, he would know by now that his son had crossed the line. When predators lose the illusion of control, they become dangerous. But so do soldiers who've got nothing left to lose. I climbed out of the truck, gravel grinding under my boots. The woods around the quarry were silent, except for the distant echo of a train somewhere to the east. Every plan I'd built overnight came down to this. Drag Preston's empire into daylight, piece by piece, using the same fear he'd used on everyone else. I unpacked what I brought. Just tools, rope, 2 signal flares, a small recorder, and a shovel. The shovel was old, the same one my father had kept in the shed since I was a kid. He used to say digging teaches patience. Tonight, it would teach truth. At the base of the north slope, I planted my first trap. Pressure plates from scrap metal wired to air horns and motion lights. The kind of noise that feeds panic. I wasn't planning to kill anyone. I wanted Preston exposed, not buried. Every man who followed him would hear what guilt sounds like in the dark. By mid-morning, I called the journalist I'd mailed the first files to. Her voice was tired but alert. "Everything's verified," she said. "We're running the story tomorrow." "Make it tonight," I told her. "And keep a camera crew ready." If Preston wanted to control the narrative, I'd hand him one he couldn't rewrite. Hours passed before the first vehicle arrived. A black SUV, the same type that had chased Mason through the woods. 5 men stepped out, helmets off, moving like they'd done this before. Preston wasn't with them yet. The driver made a call, nodded, and pointed toward the ridge. My ridge. They started forward. I waited, patient, hidden under the canopy until one of them tripped the first plate. The air erupted with a screaming roar of horns. They flinched hard, spinning around, rifles lifted. Then floodlights ignited from the opposite tree line, throwing their shadows tall and shaken against the quarry wall. I stepped out into that light, holding nothing but the shovel. "Put the guns down," I said, voice calm as gravel. Recognition flickered. One sneered. "You got lucky last time, soldier. Luck doesn't repeat," I replied. Before he could bark something back, another sound cut through the chaos. Engines. A second SUV rolled in from the southern path. The first group called out, relief spreading through their tone until the door opened and Preston stepped out. He wasn't dressed for a fight. Navy suit, clean shoes, raincoat. The kind of man who watched ruin like it was theater. "Enough of this," he said, voice echoing off the rock. "You've embarrassed yourself long enough, Ryder. Your son's dead," I said plainly. "He died trying to fix what you broke." The words hit him for a second. A small crack in that calm smile, but arrogance filled it again too quickly. "Mason was weak," he said. "He mistook guilt for redemption. I taught him that weakness has a price." I circled slowly toward the edge of the open pit. "Then maybe it's time you paid yours." He looked around, gesturing to his men. You think this scares me? I built worse empires than you could dream of. In the end, people only fear the law, not the truth. I smiled faintly. That's the thing about law. It needs truth to stand. But tonight, you're on ground I already buried. He frowned. Bury? I raised the shovel, drove its blade into the dirt, and twisted. The motion triggered the next trap. A hidden microphone linked to loudspeakers buried under tarps. Preston's own recorded voice filled the quarry, the one I'd captured from previous meetings. His words bled through the air. Erase the evidence. Make it look like an accident. Don't stop until he's ruined. The men froze. The sound came from everywhere surrounding them. Confusion turned to doubt, then anger. Preston stepped back, shaking his head. Turn that off. One of his own men looked at him, then at me. That's your voice. Preston snapped. Don't you dare. But the trap chain continued. Another clip played. If Harper or Mason talk, handle them quietly. That line landed like a bullet nobody could deflect. I watched their confidence rot in real time. 2 men dropped their weapons. Another backed toward the SUVs. Preston's composure collapsed inch by inch, face twisting with something between fury and fear. You think this clears you? He shouted. Your father was corrupt too. He had his price. Everyone does. I shook my head. Maybe, but he faced it like a man. You hide behind graves you never dig yourself. Lightning split the sky and thunder rolled through the pit like drums. Rain began to pour again, washing over mud and metal alike. Preston pointed at me, voice breaking. You'll leave this place in chains. No. I cut in quietly, my voice almost lost in the rain. You'll leave it in truth. Sirens wailed from the ridge above. Real ones this time. Blue lights bouncing across the rocks. The journalist had done it. The story was live. Every radio in town must have been replaying the same tapes that now echoed in this pit. Preston stumbled backward as officers poured down the path led by state police, not his sheriff. He looked at me once more, hollow, water dripping from his face. You don't win this, he spat. I met his gaze, calm and steady. I didn't come to win. I came to end it. When they cuffed him, he didn't resist, just stared into the mud where the lights caught the outline of 4 indentations I dug hours earlier for shallow graves side by side. He looked down, realizing what they meant. You dug these? His voice shook slightly. No, I said, turning away. You did. Rain hammered down harder, drowning words, washing everything into a blur of mud and headlights. By the time they led him away, the traps had gone silent, the speakers dead, the quarry echoing only with weather. I stood at the edge, staring at those empty holes in the ground, wondering how many more lives had been swallowed by his greed, how many more graves this town had hidden behind handshakes and brand new roads. As lightning traced across the clouds, a memory of my father's voice whispered through the noise. Justice isn't revenge. It's truth exposed. He was right. The truth was out now, but it didn't feel like justice. It felt like exhaustion, like standing at the edge of a wound that would never close. Still, I stayed there until dawn's first light cut through the fog, pale and uncertain, but steady, like the world trying to start over. Daylight broke across the quarry like a wound split open. Mud streaked the rock walls, glinting under the glow of early sun. The rain had stopped, but left behind a silence too thick to breathe. Police trucks idled at the ridge above, radios crackling orders, boots crunching gravel. Down in the pit, Preston stood cuffed, coat ruined, hair plastered to his forehead. 2 of his men sat nearby, drenched, shivering, and pale. The officers wanted to take him straight to county, but the lead investigator, federal, not local, shook his head. Evidence first, he said. Then he speaks. They had the recordings, the drive, the files. All they needed now were the confessions. That's when the officer turned to me. You started this. You end it. I walked forward slowly until I stood face to face with Preston. His eyes were full of the same arrogance, just cracked around the edges. Now he looked like a man who believed the world existed to entertain his cruelty and suddenly couldn't understand why it stopped clapping. For graves, I said quietly. One for each man who thought my father's life could be bought, beaten, and buried. You dug them in greed. You'll finish them in truth. One of the agents tossed a shovel toward Preston. It hit the mud with a dull thud. For the first time, he looked small. Not weak, just human in a way he'd spent decades avoiding. His lips curled into something like disgust, but not directed at me. More like he despised the shape of humility itself. You think this proves anything? He whispered. The system will find a way to free me. Then dig, I told him. And tell the system that to its face. The first shovel hit the mud hard, sound echoing through the open pit. The others followed, his men forced into motion by the weight of silence. Every thrust was a confession in rhythm. Shove, lift, drop. I didn't look away. As they worked, officers recorded from every angle. A camera drone hovered overhead, capturing the living proof that power had a face, a name, and now a reckoning. After minutes that bled into an hour, Preston's breathing turned ragged. He paused, leaning on the shovel handle, mud climbing his sleeves. Then he looked up. "You want words?" "Yes," I said. For once, something honest. He straightened, lips cracking into a sneer. "We built this county from nothing. Roads, water, jobs, I took from men who took before me. Your father wanted purity in a world that survives on corruption. You think you'll fix it by humiliating me?" "I'm not fixing anything," I said. "I'm ending a story that killed too many people." Harper arrived then, escorted past the police line, raincoat wrapped tight. Her face looked older by decades, every step heavy with grief that no confession could erase. When she saw Preston, she froze. "You destroyed everything," she said softly. "Even your own son." Preston turned to her, voice breaking with something almost like pain. "Mason chose weakness over legacy. He questioned blood. He tried to save it," she said. "What you did to him wasn't power. It was punishment." The silence that followed cut sharper than any blade. She turned toward me then, eyes red. "It's over." "Not until he admits it," I said. Her gaze dropped to the holes in the ground. "Then make him see." One of the officers stepped forward, reading the formal rights aloud. The words heavy against the rain-soaked morning. "Theft, bribery, conspiracy, attempted murder, obstruction of justice." Preston didn't flinch until they reached the last accessory to homicide in the assault that nearly killed my father. That broke him in half. His jaw tightened, the arrogance cracked, and for a moment, just one, his head bowed. When he lifted it again, the bravado was gone. "Fine," he whispered, breathing heavy. "I did it. I told them to make your father quiet. I didn't mean—" He stopped like even now. Pride wanted the last word. "It should have ended there." "It did," I said. "Just not the way you planned." Rain started again. Thin, light, more cleansing than cruel. The camera captured every drop hitting his face as he stood there, muddy, defeated, lips trembling at the edges. The agents moved in, pulling him back from the dug trenches, reading final charges before leading him toward the vehicles waiting above. When they passed me, he slowed just enough to whisper, "You think you've saved him, but truth ruins families, Ryder, not the lie." I let him keep that line. Men like him need something to believe while the walls close in. Harper stayed behind, standing near the graves. "These holes," she said softly. "They're not for them anymore, are they?" "No," I said. "They're for closure," she nodded faintly. "He'll face trial. But you'll have to live with this silence." "I already do." The cars rolled away one by one, engines fading into distance. The quarry quieted again except for the rain. I knelt by one of the graves, pressed my hand into the mud, and whispered for every man who thought truth could be buried. The ground was cold, solid. It didn't care about names or sins. As I walked back toward the truck, the clouds broke apart, letting soft light spill through. It landed on the 4 shallow graves, empty, waiting, symbolic, and filled them with gold for just a second before fading again. I paused, looked once more over the pit that had swallowed generations of secrets, and said under my breath, "You made men dig their own graves long before tonight, Preston. Now they'll all know why." Then I turned and left, leaving the holes open to the sky, the air smelling almost clean. Weeks passed. The news broke across every channel. Judge Preston arrested. Corruption scandal uncovered. County-wide investigation underway. His picture became a symbol of everything people whispered about, but never said out loud. The headlines called it justice, but in the quiet spaces of my father's house, justice sounded more like a heartbeat struggling to stay steady. He came home 3 days ago. The bruises had faded, but the scar above his left temple stayed, a reminder carved in skin. When I walked through the door that evening, he was sitting by the porch where the blood once was, watching the sunset stretch over the trees. He turned when he heard the boards creak. "You look tired," he said, the faintest smile tugging at his face. "I've been worse," I answered, sitting down beside him. The air smelled of pine and smoke, the same as when I was a kid. Only that night, it carried peace instead of fear. For a long moment, we didn't talk. We just sat there listening. The wood groaning softly beneath us, the wind moving through the empty fields, the world breathing again. Then he spoke, voice low but sure. "I read the articles. You did what I couldn't. I finished what you started," I said. He shook his head. "No, you started something else." Maybe he was right. Revenge ends with destruction. But truth forces you to live. And living after all this, it felt heavier than any mission I'd ever taken. Later, when he went inside, I stayed behind on the porch. The same ground that once held his blood now held silence. Clean silence. The kind that means peace earned the hard way. I pulled out the shovel. The old one, edges rusted, and buried its blade deep into the soil by the porch. Not from anger, from ending. The sound it made was soft, final, like a door closing somewhere far away. The lights from town glowed faintly in the distance. Preston was gone. Harper was cooperating with investigators, and people had begun to speak his name without fear. For once, truth had roots. I stared at the horizon until voices from the past turned quiet. Then I asked myself the only question that still mattered. After all the lies, after all the pain, what do we build next? Maybe that's the cruel beauty of survival. It demands purpose. As night settled back over the valley, I turned toward the house one last time. Inside, the low hum of my father's radio played some old song about love and loss. He was humming along. Somehow that sound felt more victorious than anything else that had come before. I closed the door and let the darkness fold around me. No anger, no vengeance, just the weight of silence that finally belonged to us. Some graves were never meant for people. They were meant for everything we needed to let die. Before you go, tell me something from the heart. Do you believe forgiveness ever truly outweighs revenge? Comment your thoughts below. I want to read them all. And hey, let me know where in the world you're watching from. Your stories reach me from every corner, and it means more than you know.